Christmas Eve in Cedar Falls, Oregon, had arrived with the kind of winter storm that shut down highways and left families stranded miles from home. Jack Morrison was driving home from an emergency call when his headlights caught something that made him pull over immediately. A black sedan, wrapped around the old oak tree beside the bus stop, steam rising from its crumpled hood. But what stopped him cold wasn't the accident itself. It was the woman standing beside the wreckage, perfectly calm despite the blood trickling from her forehead, methodically pulling files from an expensive briefcase and feeding them into a small fire she'd started in the metal trash can. The flames cast eerie shadows across her face as she worked with focused precision, her torn business suit and steady hands telling a story Jack couldn't understand. "Ma'am, you're hurt," Jack said quietly as he approached. "I'm a veterinarian, but I know enough about head injuries to help." The woman looked up with storm-gray eyes, and when she spoke, her voice carried weight. "Just call me Rachel," she whispered as he wrapped his navy wool scarf around her shoulders. "And don't tell anyone you saw me." The ride to Cedar Falls General took 30 minutes through streets blocked by fallen trees and emergency vehicles. Rachel sat quietly, occasionally touching the soft wool of Anna's scarf, the last thing his late wife had knitted, embroidered with 5-year-old Emma's tiny handprint. Jack found himself stealing glances at her expensive watch in surgeon's hands, wondering what kind of story had led to her burning documents beside a wrecked car on the worst night of the year. At the hospital, she moved with the careful control of someone who understood exactly how serious her injuries were. "This scarf is beautiful," she said, as they waited. "Your wife made it?" Jack felt the familiar tightness when strangers assumed Anna was still alive. "She did, 2 years ago." Rachel's expression softened with recognition of loss. As the nurse called her name, she tried to return the scarf, but Jack shook his head. "Keep it tonight. Bring it by my clinic tomorrow if you want. Morrison Veterinary on Oak Street." She clutched it tighter, and Jack found himself hoping tomorrow would bring answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. Jack had moved to Cedar Falls after Anna's funeral, seeking slower pace and community support for raising 5-year-old Emma alone. The transition from big city veterinary practice to small-town life had wrapped them in warmth they desperately needed. His days followed comforting rhythm. Wake at 6, make Emma's favorite animal-shaped pancakes, drop her at kindergarten where she charmed everyone with Anna's gift for finding magic in ordinary things, treat everything from prize cattle to elderly cats, pick up Emma for playground adventures, then home for dinner and bedtime stories about princesses who solved problems with kindness. The routine kept him grounded, gave structure to days that might dissolve into grief. Emma had adapted better than he had, making friends easily and covering their refrigerator with colorful artwork. But sometimes Jack caught her staring out windows with expressions too serious for her age, thinking about the mother she barely remembered and the baby brother who never got to be born. Those moments reminded him that healing wasn't something you achieved once. It was something you chose again and again, day after day, until choosing became as natural as breathing. 3 days later, Rachel appeared at his clinic, carrying a wicker basket smelling of fresh coffee and homemade muffins. She looked different in civilian clothes, dark jeans and green sweater that brought out her eyes, the cut on her forehead now just a thin line. "I brought breakfast," she said, setting the basket down with graceful efficiency. "And I washed your scarf. I hope you don't mind that I mended a small hole near the hem." Jack accepted the carefully folded scarf, noticing the repair work was nearly invisible, precise, delicate stitching requiring both patience and skill. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, touched by the gesture. "Actually, I did," Rachel replied with a smile that transformed her face. "I'm Rachel Martinez. I'm new in town, and I was hoping you might know if anyone needs help with medical care. For animals, I mean. I have some experience." Jack studied her face, noting how she said "some experience," like it was both true and vast understatement. Something about her careful word choice and confident posture suggested much more to her story than she was ready to share. Over the following weeks, Rachel became a regular presence, arriving mornings with coffee and staying to help with cases. Jack quickly discovered her "some experience" claim had been modest to the point of comedy. She sutured wounds with master surgeon precision, diagnosed complex conditions that had him reaching for textbooks, and handled emergencies with calm competence, suggesting she'd seen far more trauma than most small-town doctors. When Mrs. Patterson's German Shepherd came in with what looked like simple limping, but turned out to be torn cruciate ligament requiring delicate surgery, Rachel assisted with skill that made Jack wonder exactly what medical background she was hiding. Her hands moved with fluid confidence of someone who'd spent years in operating rooms, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. "Where did you learn to handle surgical instruments like that?" he asked afterward. Rachel paused while sterilizing a scalpel, expression suddenly guarded. "YouTube," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'd be amazed what you can learn online." Jack raised an eyebrow but didn't push, recognizing the careful deflection. "That must have been some very detailed tutorial," he said gently, letting her know he was available whenever she was ready to share her real story. The first time Rachel met Emma, Jack was running late after complicated calving. When he finally returned to the clinic, he found Rachel sitting cross-legged on the floor with his daughter, both absorbed in repairing Emma's worn teddy bear. Emma clutched Mr. Teddy, while Rachel carefully stitched a tear in his side with the same precision she brought to animal surgery. The scene hit Jack like a physical blow, not painful, but beautiful beyond belief. "The important thing," Rachel was saying softly, "is making sure Mr. Teddy knows he's loved even when hurt. Sometimes being broken doesn't mean worthless, just means we need extra care." Emma nodded solemnly, tracing the new stitches. "Mama used to say that too. She said broken things can be more beautiful when fixed with love." Rachel's hands stilled, and Jack saw her blink back tears. "Your mama sounds very wise," she said, "and I bet she was right about many things." When Emma saw Jack in the doorway, her face lit up. "Daddy!" Miss Rachel fixed Mr. Teddy, "and she knows the same medicine as you, but for people." Rachel stood, and Jack caught a glimpse of longing in her expression as she watched Emma hug her repaired bear with fierce gratitude. As autumn deepened into winter, the three fell into rhythm that felt natural and miraculous. Rachel arrived each morning with coffee and stories for Emma about previous travels, though remaining carefully vague about specifics. Evenings often found her at their house on Elm Street, helping Emma with homework while Jack finished paperwork, sharing simple dinners that somehow tasted better than any meal since Anna's death. Emma adored Rachel with uncomplicated childhood enthusiasm, asking endless questions about medicine that Rachel answered with patient humor. "Miss Rachel, why do people have different colored eyes?" Emma would ask, and Rachel would launch into age-appropriate genetics explanations, complete with silly voices that made Emma giggle. Jack found himself looking forward to these domestic moments with intensity that both comforted and worried him. It had been so long since he'd imagined a future including anyone beyond himself and Emma. But pieces of Rachel's story didn't quite fit. Her car was modest Honda, but her watch definitely wasn't. Her phone rang constantly with calls she always declined, muttering about hospital administration, before turning the device face down with increasing frustration. The truth began unraveling on a snowy December evening when Emma had fallen asleep on the clinic couch after helping with appointments. Jack and Rachel were cleaning surgical instruments in comfortable silence when her phone buzzed with a text that made her face pale. This time she wasn't quick enough to hide the screen. "Board meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Martinez Healthcare Group needs your decision about the merger proposal immediately. Dr. Harrison." Jack felt puzzle pieces shift, creating a picture both clearer and more confusing than anything he'd imagined. "Martinez Healthcare Group," he said slowly. "That's not exactly a small medical practice." Rachel saw him reading and quickly turned the phone over, but damage was done. The careful distance she'd maintained between her two worlds had just collapsed. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "It's not." Silence felt heavy with questions Jack didn't know how to ask, and answers Rachel wasn't ready to give. Finally, she sank into a plastic chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "I suppose you want an explanation," she said, though it wasn't really a question. The conversation that followed changed everything between them. Rachel told him about Martinez Healthcare Group, not just where she used to work, but the company she owned, the empire her father had built from nothing before leaving it all to her when he died 5 years earlier. She described the crushing weight of running a multi-billion-dollar corporation employing thousands across 3 states, board meetings that felt like battles, and constant pressure to choose profit over compassion. "I inherited more than money, Jack," she said, voice growing stronger. "I inherited responsibility for every person depending on our hospitals for livelihood, every patient needing care they can't afford, every community that would lose their only medical facility if I make wrong financial decisions." Jack listened without interrupting, beginning to understand why she'd seemed so lost that night at the bus stop. She told him about 7-year-old Danny who died during routine heart surgery, how media turned medical tragedy into public spectacle, and how she'd walked away rather than face failing another child. "I've been driving around the country for months," she admitted, "trying to figure out who I am when I'm not Dr. Rachel Martinez, CEO extraordinaire. Trying to learn how to heal again instead of just managing other people's healing attempts." When she finished, Jack reached across and took her hand, feeling surgeon's calluses and slight tremor. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "For Danny, and for everything you've been carrying alone." 3 weeks later, their peace shattered when Dr. Marcus Harrison arrived with 2 black SUVs and corporate lawyers who looked like boardroom drama characters. Jack was removing a benign tumor from a golden retriever when he heard voices. Rachel's tense and defensive, a man's carrying boardroom authority. When Jack came out front, he found Rachel facing corporate intervention, with Emma hiding behind the reception desk, sensing something frightening was happening. "Rachel, this charade has gone on long enough," Marcus was saying. "Martinez Healthcare Group is hemorrhaging money without proper leadership. Stock prices are down 37% since you disappeared, and we're facing shareholder lawsuits." A lawyer slid a thick folder across the desk. "Miss Martinez, these documents require your immediate return to active corporate leadership. As majority shareholder and CEO, you cannot abandon fiduciary responsibilities without serious legal consequences." Rachel's face was pale but determined. "I told you I needed time to reassess the company's direction. Just because I'm not in a Portland boardroom doesn't mean I've abandoned anything." Marcus noticed Jack and extended his hand, with practiced charm that felt threatening. "Dr. Morrison, I presume? I'm Dr. Marcus Harrison, Chief Medical Officer at Portland Medical Center and interim CEO of Martinez Healthcare Group. I'm here to bring our CEO home." The emphasis on "our CEO" made Jack's stomach clench. This wasn't just about a job, but about a woman whose wealth and power made her completely different from the person who'd been healing animals and reading bedtime stories to his daughter. The confrontation was swift and devastating. Marcus laid out exactly what Rachel's disappearance had cost. Hospitals forced to close in rural communities, medical research programs canceled, specialized treatment centers unable to operate without strategic leadership. "Do you understand what you've done?" Marcus asked, voice rising. "Dr. Morrison, your friend here isn't playing hooky from some corporate job. Rachel controls a healthcare empire worth over $2 billion. She employs 15,000 people across 3 states. Her personal crisis has real consequences for real families depending on our payroll." Jack felt like drowning, struggling to reconcile the woman who'd stitched Mr. Teddy with the CEO whose decisions affected thousands of lives. The numbers made his head spin. $2 billion, 15,000 employees, hospitals in 3 states. It was like discovering his quiet neighbor was actually a world leader in disguise. Rachel stood perfectly still, but Jack could see responsibility settling on her shoulders like physical burden. Marcus wasn't wrong. Rachel did have responsibilities extending beyond personal healing, and her absence was affecting real people in ways that mattered more than any individual's self-discovery journey. When Marcus finally paused, the silence felt deafening, broken only by Emma crying behind the reception desk, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't understand but felt in every adult face. Emma's tears broke through the standoff like sunshine through storm clouds, reminding everyone that innocent casualties existed in grown-up battles. Rachel immediately went to Emma, kneeling behind the desk and gathering the frightened 5-year-old into her arms with natural protectiveness. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, smoothing Emma's hair. "It's okay. Sometimes grown-ups talk about serious things, but nothing bad will happen to you or your daddy." Emma looked up with trusting eyes and asked the words that would change everything. "Are you going to leave us, like Mama did?" The question hit like a physical blow, cutting through legal documents and financial projections to what really mattered. Rachel's breath caught, tears flowing as she realized her personal crisis had expanded to include people she'd never meant to hurt. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, holding Emma closer. "I would never want to leave you and your daddy. But sometimes grown-ups make very difficult choices about helping the most people possible." Marcus chose that moment to play his final card. "Rachel, we've prepared a generous settlement package for Dr. Morrison and his daughter," he said, pulling another document, enough to ensure Emma's college education and comfortable retirement. "All you have to do is come home and resume CEO responsibilities. Everyone wins." The implication was clear. Rachel's new life was a luxury she couldn't afford, and the people she'd grown to love were obstacles that could be bought and removed. "Get out," Jack said quietly, his voice carrying authority that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. "Take your money and documents and get out of my clinic." Marcus looked genuinely surprised, as if he'd never encountered someone who couldn't be bought. "Dr. Morrison, I think you're not understanding what we're offering here. This isn't some small-town practice. This is generational wealth, enough to ensure your daughter never wants for anything." Jack stepped forward, positioning himself between Marcus and his family, because that's what Rachel and Emma had become. "You're right, I don't understand," he said, voice growing stronger. "I don't understand how you reduce a human being to a balance sheet. I don't understand how you look at a 5-year-old and see a problem solved with money. And I definitely don't understand how you claim to care about Rachel's well-being while treating her like property." Rachel stood slowly, still holding Emma, and Jack could see something changing in her posture, a straightening, suggesting she was remembering who she'd been before fear and guilt bent her down. "Marcus," she said, voice carrying unmistakable tone of someone making final decisions. "I'll give you my answer in 24 hours, but right now, leave these people alone. This conversation is between you and me." Marcus nodded curtly, clearly displeased. 24 hours, Rachel. After that, the board will take more drastic measures." As his team filed out, Jack felt like he'd survived a natural disaster, but knew the real storm was just beginning. That evening found Jack and Rachel on her apartment porch, watching snow fall on quiet Cedar Falls streets while Emma slept safely at home, worn out by emotional upheaval. Rachel wore Anna's scarf again, wrapped tightly as if it could shield her from the decision she faced. "You're going back," Jack said, not a question, because they both knew there was really only one choice. Rachel was quiet so long Jack thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "How can I not? Marcus is right about one thing. There are people depending on Martinez Healthcare Group who never asked to be caught up in my personal crisis. Patients needing surgery, employees needing paychecks, communities depending on our hospitals for basic care." Jack felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest, but forced himself to think about what Rachel needed rather than what he wanted. "Is that what you think you've been doing here? Having a personal crisis?" Rachel turned to look at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Haven't I? What we do here is important, but it's not the same as running a healthcare empire. It's not saving children's lives or keeping hospitals open in underserved communities." Jack was quiet, choosing words carefully. 3 weeks ago, you diagnosed Mrs. Chen's diabetic cat and taught her to manage the condition, probably adding years to that animal's life and saving an elderly woman from heartbreak of losing her only companion. Last month, you helped Tommy Martinez rehabilitate his injured hawk, and that bird's recovery kept a troubled teenager engaged when nothing else could reach him. Jack paused, watching her face in dim light. "And, Emma," he continued softly, "you've given her something I couldn't. You've shown her that healing is possible, that broken things can be made whole, that there are people who show up when you need them most. If that's not life and death important, I don't know what is. Rachel was crying now, tears flowing silently into Anna's scarf. But what if Marcus is right about me being selfish? What if I'm hiding here because I'm too scared to face losing another patient, making another mistake that costs someone their life? Jack took her hand, feeling the tremor that never quite went away. Then you're human, he said simply. And being human doesn't disqualify you from being a healer. It makes you better at it. But Rachel, whatever you decide has to be your choice, not Marcus's and not mine. You're the only one who knows what you can live with. They sat in silence as snow continued falling, and Jack thought about Anna and how she'd always believed love meant supporting someone's choices, even when those choices broke your heart. When Rachel finally stood, she carefully unwound Anna's scarf and held it out with shaking hands. "This belongs with your family," she said quietly. "It was never meant for me." Jack looked at the scarf, at Anna's careful stitches and Emma's tiny handprint. "Keep it," he said, voice barely steady. "Anna would have wanted you to have something to remember us by." Rachel shook her head, pressing the scarf into his hands with finality that felt like goodbye. "I don't need anything to remember you by, Jack Morrison. Some things are too important to forget." 2 weeks passed like slow-motion car accident, with Jack going through daily motions while feeling like half of himself had been surgically removed. Rachel had left for Portland the morning after their conversation, and the silence was deafening in ways he hadn't anticipated. Emma asked about her constantly, and Jack struggled to explain why their friend had gone away without promising she'd return. The clinic felt different without Rachel's morning coffee runs and effortless anticipation of his needs. Even animal patients seemed to sense the change, looking around expectantly for gentle voice and steady hands that had become natural part of their healing process. Jack tried filling empty hours with extra work, staying late to reorganize supply closets and taking on cases that could have waited, but nothing eased the ache of missing someone who'd become essential to his happiness. Mrs. Patterson mentioned seeing moving trucks at Rachel's apartment, and Jack felt his last hope disappear. She was really gone, and he was back to the life he'd thought was enough before she'd shown him what it felt like to be part of something larger than survival. The worst part was Emma's gradual acceptance of Rachel's absence. The way she stopped asking when Miss Rachel was coming back and started talking about her in past tense, instinctively understanding that some people came into your life like shooting stars, beautiful, bright, and ultimately temporary. The call came Tuesday morning in January, jolting Jack from sleep at 3 a.m. with urgency that always meant bad news. "Mr. Morrison? This is Dr. Sarah Kim at Portland Medical Center. I'm calling about your daughter, Emma." The words hit like ice water, and Jack was out of bed reaching for clothes before his mind processed what he was hearing. "What's wrong? Is she hurt?" His first thought was accident, but then he remembered Emma was safely asleep down the hall. "She was brought in about an hour ago after collapsing at her friend's sleepover party. We believe she's experiencing cardiac arrhythmia, irregular heartbeat causing her to lose consciousness. We need to run tests, but she's asking for someone named Miss Rachel. Do you know who that might be?" Jack felt the world tilt sideways and he gripped his dresser to stay upright. Emma had never shown heart problems, but he knew children could hide symptoms or conditions could develop suddenly. "Miss Rachel is Dr. Rachel Martinez," he said, voice sounding strange. She was a cardiac surgeon. I'm not sure where she is now." There was a pause, sound of pages turning and computers clicking. "Dr. Martinez is actually here at Portland Medical Center. She returned to her position as chief of cardiac surgery 2 weeks ago. Would you like me to contact her about Emma's case?" Jack was already heading for the door, mind reeling. "Yes, please, and tell her I'm driving up from Cedar Falls now. I'll be there in 3 hours." When Jack arrived at Portland Medical Center, he found Emma sleeping in a hospital bed that made her look impossibly small, connected to monitors beeping and flashing with vital information. Dr. Kim waited in a consultation room with test results and gentle expression medical professionals used for serious news. "Emma's condition is concerning but treatable," Dr. Kim explained, spreading EKG printouts across the table. "She has a congenital heart defect called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. something she was born with, but symptoms don't always appear until school age. The good news is, it can be corrected with a surgical procedure that has very high success rate. Jack felt relief and terror equally, struggling to process technical details while his mind circled the central fact that his daughter needed heart surgery. What kind of surgery? How dangerous is it? Dr. Kim showed him heart diagrams that looked like maps of countries he'd never wanted to visit, explaining about electrical pathways and catheters and ablation. We need to create a small controlled burn to disconnect an extra electrical pathway, causing the irregular rhythm. It's performed through a blood vessel, so minimally invasive, and success rate is very high when performed by an experienced cardiac surgeon. She paused, consulting notes carefully. I understand Emma has been asking for Dr. Martinez. While I could certainly perform this procedure, Dr. Martinez is one of the most skilled cardiac surgeons in the country, particularly with pediatric cases. If you'd like, I could ask her to consult on Emma's case. Jack nodded without hesitation, knowing that whatever complicated feelings he had about Rachel's departure, Emma's health was more important than his wounded pride or broken heart. Emma woke an hour later, groggy from sedation but alert enough to recognize her father. "Daddy, my heart feels funny," she said, pressing a small hand to her chest with matter-of-fact acceptance children brought to frightening situations. "Like it's skipping rope inside me." Jack smoothed her hair, remembering how Anna used to do the same when Emma was feverish, trying to keep his voice steady. "The doctors are going to fix it, sweetheart. You're going to be just fine." Emma's eyes brightened with interest rather than fear, and Jack marveled at his daughter's resilience. "Is Miss Rachel here? I dreamed she was singing to me." Jack felt his throat tighten with emotions he couldn't name. "Dr. Kim is trying to call her, but even if she can't come, there are other very good doctors here who can help you get better." Emma nodded seriously, but Jack could see disappointment, and he found himself praying that Rachel would agree to see them, that whatever had driven her from Cedar Falls wouldn't prevent her from helping his daughter when she needed it most. Before he could say more, there was a soft knock on the door, and Rachel appeared in the doorway, wearing scrubs and the focused expression Jack had learned to associate with medical emergencies. "I hear someone's been asking for me," she said gently, moving to Emma's bedside with fluid grace of someone who belonged in hospitals. Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "Miss Rachel, I knew you'd come. My heart is broken, but now you can fix it." Rachel sat on the bed's edge, taking Emma's small hand in both of hers. "Well, let's take a look at what's going on, shall we?" The surgery was scheduled for the next morning, and Rachel spent the evening going over Emma's test results with intensity that reminded Jack why she'd become chief of surgery at such a young age. "The pathway we need to ablate is in a tricky location," she explained as they stood outside Emma's room. "It's close to the normal electrical system, so it requires a very steady hand and precise timing. But I've done this procedure dozens of times, and Emma's anatomy is actually quite favorable." Jack nodded, trying to process technical details while fighting waves of parental anxiety. "Is there any chance of complications?" Rachel was quiet for a moment, and Jack appreciated that she didn't try to sugarcoat reality. There's always risk with any procedure involving the heart, but the biggest risk Emma faces is not having the surgery. Without treatment, her episodes will get worse and more frequent. She looked through the window at Emma, who was coloring with focused concentration. "Jack, I need you to know that if you'd rather have someone else perform the surgery, I'll understand, completely. Dr. Kim is excellent, and there are other cardiac surgeons here who could—" Jack cut her off. "Emma asked for you. That's all I need to know." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "What if something goes wrong? What if I can't save her?" Jack saw the shadow of Danny, the 7-year-old boy whose death had driven Rachel from surgery, cross her face. "Then you'll have done everything humanly possible, and that will have to be enough. But Rachel, you've already saved her in ways that have nothing to do with surgery. You've shown her that broken things can be healed, that people who care about each other show up when it matters. That's not nothing." The morning of surgery arrived gray and cold, with snow falling steadily outside hospital windows. Rachel appeared in Emma's room at 6 a.m., looking calm and professional despite the weight of what lay ahead. "Good morning, sunshine," she said to Emma, who was trying to be brave but couldn't quite hide her nervousness. "Are you ready to get that heart of yours running smoothly?" Emma nodded, then reached under her pillow and pulled out Anna's navy scarf. "I wanted to bring this with me, for luck." Jack started to object. Hospital protocol wouldn't normally allow personal items in surgery, but Rachel held up a hand. "Actually, I think that's a wonderful idea. Would you like me to keep it safe for you during the procedure?" Emma handed over the scarf with the solemnity of someone entrusting a precious treasure. "It has magic in it," she whispered. "Mama Anna put love stitches in it, and then Miss Rachel fixed it with more love stitches, so it has extra protection." Rachel accepted the scarf with appropriate gravity. "I'll take very good care of it, and I'll take very good care of you too." As the surgical team wheeled Emma toward the operating room, she called out to Jack, "Tell Miss Rachel to remember about the love stitches." Jack nodded, throat too tight to speak, and watched his daughter disappear through double doors with the kind of trust that only children possessed. The next 4 hours were the longest of Jack's life. He paced the surgical waiting room, drank terrible coffee from vending machines, and tried not to think about all the ways things could go wrong. Dr. Kim stopped by periodically to reassure him that everything was proceeding normally, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his entire world was hanging in the balance. Finally, the doors opened and Rachel emerged, still wearing surgical scrubs, but with a smile that told him everything he needed to know before she said a word. "She did beautifully," Rachel said, sinking into a chair beside him with exhausted relief of someone who'd just completed a marathon. "The pathway was exactly where we expected it to be, and the ablation was textbook perfect. Her heart rhythm is already normal, and it should stay that way for the rest of her life." Jack felt tears he hadn't even known he was holding back stream down his face. "She's really okay?" Rachel nodded, reaching into her pocket and pulling out Anna's scarf. "She asked me to give this back to you when she woke up. She said the love stitches worked exactly like she knew they would." Jack took the scarf, noting it smelled faintly of antiseptic but somehow still carried the essence of all the people who had loved it. "Can I see her?" Rachel stood up, steadying herself against the chair with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and relief. "She's in recovery now, but she should be awake in about an hour." The conversation that followed took place in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, over coffee that was marginally better than the vending machine variety. Rachel's hands wrapped around her cup as if drawing strength from its warmth, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Jack lean forward. "There's something I haven't told you about who I really am," she began. "After Emma's surgery, Dr. Kim offered me my old position back. The board apparently reconsidered their deadline when they heard I was operating again." Jack felt his heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with medical conditions. "That's wonderful news. You deserve to have your career back." Rachel shook her head. "I turned them down, but not because I want to run away again. I want to restructure Martinez Healthcare Group to focus on what really matters, bringing quality medical care to underserved communities like Cedar Falls. I want to create mobile surgical units, telemedicine programs, and satellite clinics that can serve people who can't access major medical centers." She paused, looking directly into his eyes. "And I want to do it while also becoming part of a family that's taught me what really matters. If you'll have me." Jack felt something shift in his chest, a lightness he hadn't experienced since Anna's death. "Are you sure? You'd be giving up a lot." Rachel reached across the table and took his hand, her surgeon's fingers intertwining with his in a way that felt like coming home. "I'd be gaining everything that matters, a purpose that feeds my soul, work that makes a real difference, and, if you'll let me, a chance to help raise the most remarkable little girl I've ever met." Jack squeezed her hand, thinking about Anna and the way she'd always believed that love multiplied rather than divided when shared. "I think Emma would like that very much, and so would I." 6 months later, Cedar Falls had become the model for rural healthcare that Rachel had envisioned. The Martinez Healthcare Group's pilot program had expanded to include satellite clinics in neighboring towns, mobile surgical units bringing specialized care to remote areas, and a telemedicine network connecting small-town doctors with specialists in major cities. Rachel split her time between hands-on patient care and running the company. But she'd restructured Martinez Healthcare to prioritize community impact over pure profit, a decision that had initially terrified the board, but ultimately proved both financially and ethically sound. The Morrison family had quietly expanded to include Rachel in ways that felt both natural and miraculous, though they'd never felt the need to make their arrangement official with paperwork or ceremony. Emma, now 6 and fully recovered from her surgery, had appointed herself as the unofficial ambassador of the Cedar Falls medical campus, equally comfortable explaining veterinary procedures to curious visitors and helping elderly patients navigate the new telemedicine equipment. Anna's navy scarf hung in a place of honor in their living room, but it was no longer a monument to loss. It had become a symbol of the way love could stretch and grow to accommodate new people without diminishing what had come before. On quiet evenings, Jack would find Rachel, reviewing expansion plans for the rural healthcare program, while Emma practiced the surgical knots Rachel had taught her, and these moments filled him with a contentment he'd thought was lost forever. Sometimes the greatest transformations happen not when we rescue others, but when we allow ourselves to be found by someone who sees past our titles and bank accounts to the person we're meant to become.